Let's talk about how government makes choices in the form of policy. So, a democracy is an assembly, but you still need an operating system to operate that assembly. In order to what? To make decisions, collective decisions of a free and independent state, which includes living war, concluding peace, contracting alliances, establishing commerce, and any other acts and things that an independent state may by right do. Okay? That is government in a nutshell, is making these policy decisions. And if you look at the debates and how they try to separate candidates like Trump and Harris, is based on what? Policy. And whose policy they think is the best for whatever, for the economy or for world affairs or whatever, right? Taxation. Whose policy? How do they make those decisions of policy? Right? So, like I said, a democracy just is the assembly. You still have to operate it. It has to function. To do what? Well, a democracy is a assembly of as equals with equal suffrage to participate in the legislative process in order to reach a majority consensus. Okay? What's the legislative process? That's the whole problem with democracy, is because in a democracy, if all are equal with equal suffrage, that equality must be maintained through this decision-making process. So you need what? You need a quorum requirement just to identify and rank the choices. And you need a majority consensus requirement depending on the critical nature of the decision that you're making. It might have to have a higher majority consensus. Under the Articles of Confederation, they had a quorum requirement of 9 of 13 states just to discuss and agree on what the language of what they were making a decision on, That's just to agree on the backbone of what they're doing. And then they needed a majority consensus of 9 of 13 states to adopt it, which is called determining the question. Okay? So you had to have that equality and participation in identifying and ranking the choices, and you needed a majority consensus of all the states in order to determine the question. And that's what consensus choice is. Why? Because democracy is about agreement, and you can't reach an agreement if the choices that you are trying to determine what choice to make, one side makes it and the other one doesn't. You'll never reach agreement that way. And so how do they reach agreement? Well, that's where consensus choice comes in, because you'll never reach agreement to do anything if everybody is fighting for their own point of view. So what you have to do is you have to make them all participate in the choices, rank the choices, and then determine the choice from the top choices. Because even like the Supreme Court, when they assembled it under the Articles of Confederation, they had a choice. Either the two parties of the dispute could agree on an adjudicator, a panel, to hear and resolve the matter. But if they couldn't agree, then they had to come up with a way of forming a balanced, non-biased adjudicator. And what they did was they forced each state to choose 3 people from their own state to form a list of people. They reduced that list to 1 per state. At that time, by the litigants of the matter, they would strike names off the list, starting with the petitioner. Okay, until they had 1 person per state left. Okay, then Congress at that point would reduce that list to no less than 7 and no more than 9. Okay, so all the states participated in some type of a selection process to rank the remaining candidates and come up with 7 to 9 that they would put in the hat. And then the litigants would draw out 5 names, starting with the petitioner, that would hear and decide the case. And that way they can get the agreement of these states to abide by the decision of the Supreme Court. Okay? Why? Because they participated in making sure that the court was balanced, and that they had just as much opportunity to have their own people deciding the matter as anybody else. Okay, so it's a totally non-biased, apolitical choice, and that's the same way they did with the president. They did the same thing with how to elect the president. They did the same thing with how to elect senators. Did the same thing with how to appoint for vacancies in the executive and judicial department. It's this, you form this list, and then that everybody can agree with, all the names on that list. And then you only consider the top names on the list. The same way with any other matter that you're deciding in the legislature. You're going to do a cost-benefit relationship that shows you on that curve where you get the most benefit for the least cost. And then from those choices, you take the top choices that gives you the most benefits for the least cost, and you vote to determine a choice. Okay? That's how you do it without having all this bickering. Because you can't come up, mutable government is a cancer. And you can't have somebody coming in who's going to totally turn everything upside down that the country's already doing, and try to inflict his or her agenda for policy. No. Policy has to be a consensus choice with participation of all equally involved in making the choice. You can't have one side with the power to determine the choices and then say either take it or leave it. That's not consensus choice, and that's not democracy. So when you're trying to talk about democracy, democracy must function in a way that equality of participation is maintained and equality of suffrage to determine the choices is maintained. And that's why consensus choice is the governing process for how to reach a majority consensus. You have a quorum requirement to identify and rank choices. Then once you know what those choices are, then you can determine the choice by vote. One vote per state, and a majority of all the states is necessary to the choice. Now, all the choices on the list are agreeable to everybody. There are no choices on that list that aren't agreeable to all the states. Everybody. I don't care if you're a conservative or progressive or what you are. All the choices that you make that way are agreeable to all the people in all the states all the time. So you're voting your pocketbook and your priorities. You're not voting for ideological, political position. You're voting based on, if I need a dump truck, I'm sure not going to go out there and buy a Bugatti. Okay? Now, how big a dump truck do I need to do the job? And how much is the cost benefit for the size of the truck versus the job that I need to do, the cost associated with that truck? That's how you do consensus choice. And we do that as engineers all the time. We find process stability points where we can operate at steady state. And we look at what's the quality of the product and the efficiency of making the product at those different points. And that goes down to all the utilities and raw materials and your final certificate of analysis, which tells you what the quality of the product is on that curve. And then we find the most efficient place on that curve to operate at the lowest cost. That's consensus choice. And you can't have a democracy without consensus choice. It just can't. Because you have to have that equality of participation in determining the choices before you can vote to determine the choice. Okay? Right now, we don't have any equality at all in the choices or in the final choice. And we're not deciding things by a majority consensus. Look at Trump. Trump maybe got 22% of all the people in the country voted in that popular election for him. He didn't even get a majority of all the people who voted. So how can you say that's a democratic choice? When why did we have to have him choose between him and Harris in the first place? Okay? That's the question you have to ask yourself. That's why you need consensus choice. Thanks.